Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world. So much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing incredibly well, and don't forget to get that lovely hot cup of cocoa or coffee or whatever it is that you drink, because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight that you're really going to love. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Amber, and my Bigfoot encounter happened in 1994 when I was about 25 years old at the time. I grew up near Jefferson County in West Virginia on an exquisitely beautiful apple farm where we grew golden delicious apples. We lived on an idyllic farmstead full of acres of orchards, and we have been very fortunate to produce an abundant crop over many years, because a good apple tree will net you about 800 apples if you're very lucky. Growing up, I had two older brothers, Steve and Michael, who were 15 years older than me. So I was rather like a late lamb, so to speak. And so in many ways I was raised like an only child, as both of my brothers had flown the nest years ago when I was only young. Our farm was very pretty, but if you've been to West Virginia before, you will understand what I mean, as it's an exquisite part of the world to behold. We lived in a symmetrical style farmhouse with a green roof, whitewashed walls, large sash windows and an extended wraparound porch that embraced the magnificent panoramic views that overlooked orchards on the one side and mountainous valleys and vast areas of natural wood green on the other. If that wasn't enough, we had a pond and a stream that meandered through the wooded area on our land that we also called the Grove. That was literally a natural haven for all kinds of indigenous wildlife, from white-tailed deers to squirrels and you name it. We had it all. I spent copious amounts of time in our Sylvan with my very best friend Hayley, who had become like a sister to me. We adored spending time together in the woods, as for some reason majestic imposing trees, natural wondrous wildlife and sparkling fast-flowing water are just the quintessential combination of Earth's natural wonders that always enhance your sense of pleasure. For indeed this precious sanctuary became for us like a treasured magical secret world, all of our very own, away from prying parents and interfering busybodies. It was our special place that we would love to frequent as often as we possibly could. We would take loads of apples into the sumptuous grove, which we would feed to the very appreciative deer. And there was one particular very quirky little doe with a gregarious and congenial personality who was so tame and affectionate that would often follow us around like a dog. So we called her Meadow. I had never ever heard of a deer behaving like this before, but Meadow was exceptional and we adored her. I even put a large pink leather collar around her neck with her name engraved upon it and the words "Not to be shot" on the tag, so that any potential hunter would hopefully leave her well alone and realise that this tame, endearing doe was like a beloved pet to someone. Hayley and I had a very special relationship, and growing up there were signs that the hairy man was indeed around, possibly watching our every move. But in those days I was blindly oblivious to all the signs that would possibly get my attention now. There were times in the woods when everything would suddenly grow very quiet, and even the bird call would just dissipate all of a sudden, and all you could hear was the sound of water from the stream jetting across the rocky outcrops. Hayley and I would look at each other with perturbed bewilderment on our faces, pondering as to why the birds had suddenly stopped chirping. There were also times when we both got the overwhelming sensation that we were being watched, but we rarely failed to see any sign that this was indeed the truth, because when we looked around our immediate surroundings, there was nobody there. There was one occasion after a heavy rainstorm that we were to discover a trail of muddy footprints that were so gargantuan they looked like they'd been made by a giant. We knew that these were not the footprints of a bear because they had toes, and bears have claws, so Hayley and I were gobsmacked and always pondered as to what this strange creature lurking around the woods could possibly be. I remember we did follow them to the edge of the Sylvan and found a large tree-like tent structure that was made from timbers that had been strategically placed over each other so that they reminded me of an Indian wigwam, and there was a large nest in the tepee that was layered with hay, and there was an indentation in this nest that looked like something really big, colossal and hefty had been lying there, but what we couldn't imagine. I do remember the nest smelt like a zoo, like the smell you get from a camel enclosure. We were once again stumped as to what this could possibly be. And who could possibly have made a structure like this? Because whoever they were, they had to be very intelligent. Fast forward a few years where my life had become much more about dating boys than spending a lot of time in the woods with my friend Hayley. Instead, we both developed interests that revolved around makeup, clothes, boys and parties. We would spend our time giggling, laughing and gossiping about the people we met and the parties we attended. You know, the usual teenage stuff. By then I'd been dating several very nerdish moonstruck boys, and for some reason I always drew the short straw when it came to picking men, as my tumultuous, turbulent relationships invariably always ended up in disaster. Finally, when I was about 22, I moved away from our farmstead into a student's dig in Charleston, and that was when I began to date a rather dapper-looking policeman called Ted Barber. He was tall, dark and handsome, with piercing blue eyes. For a while our relationship was truly wonderful. Well, it was at first, but that was soon to change as dramatically as from the heat of the summer to the icy coldness of winter. That was how dramatic the changes were in our relationship. I actually met him when he pulled me over to the side of the road for accidentally running a red light. He did let me off with a warning on the one condition that I joined him for a drink. I remember warming to the man's charming demeanour, and so I agreed. I was attracted to Ted from the very start, whether it was his uniform or the fact that he seemed to be such a solid, reliable type. I don't really know. In truth, all the other previous men that I'd dated had all been rather flaky and witless, without any real substance or grit. Ted seemed so different, and his sense of humour was a drawing card for me. Another thing I found very attractive about him was his immense drive and determination, and his extraordinary focus to get ahead in life. By contrast, I was like a whimsical, naive butterfly darting from one flower to another, never quite being able to decide what it was I wanted to do with my life. My mind was as changeable as the weather, so someone who had such direction and was so focused really was very appealing to me. As our relationship progressed, suddenly the attractive veneer of the seemingly perfect boyfriend of mine began to slip off. I began to see the egocentric Ted had a very dark side to his character and an insatiable, pompous ego that could not be suppressed by any manner of means. I was to discover that my narcissistic boyfriend was always right, and to disagree with him was treachery and would literally cause him to explode like a volcanic eruption that just could not be contained. He would become so incensed that he would begin to throw things around the house, breaking everything in sight, and once he'd finally calmed down, his apartment invariably looked like it had been ransacked. It was like in his presence you needed to walk on eggshells just to keep the peace. One day when I was having dinner with Ted at his apartment in Charleston, I just happened to mention that his friend Carl was a very attractive-looking police officer that looked like he was going places in the force. Suddenly, the irate Ted looked as if he was growing green at the gills, and his face became crimson with rage, and then he slammed the table defiantly with his fists and threw his plate across the kitchen, where onion gravy and sausages began to trickle and slide down the walls in brown clumps of nasty-looking goo. "I knew it," he screamed. "I knew it. You have the hots for Carl. I've seen the way you've looked at him. You fancy him, don't you? You're a nasty little slapper. You know that." He suddenly became so enraged that he straddled me against the wall and placed his hands over my neck and began to squeeze very tightly, with the intention of killing me. I knew he was strangling me, and I could feel my life ebbing away from me, and at one stage I almost felt as if I was floating out of my body. I tried with all my might to fight back, but I seemed powerless to do anything, although I did try and wiggle and kick as much as I could, but being so slight and petite, my very best efforts were completely useless against Ted's powerful form. All of a sudden he stopped squeezing my neck, as there was a loud knocking at the door, and his father's voice. "Sorry, son," he called. "Can I ask a favour? I'm having some trouble getting my car to start. You couldn't help me, could you?" Of course, father, I'll help you, said Ted, releasing his tight hold from my neck and glaring at me with defiant eyes as savage as a tiger. He went over to the door to open it for his father, and in that second, in my flight-to-fight response for survival, I made a hasty retreat and stumbled past Ted's father very quickly, who said to Ted, "My word, she's in a hurry." I dived into my car, started up the engine and hastily accelerated back to my digs as fast as I possibly could, taking sharp, rapid breaths of air. When I finally got back to the digs, I discerned the red marks from Ted's hands around my neck, and they were horrifying to observe in the mirror. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that if Ted's father had not knocked on his door, I could potentially be dead right now, and that revelation was very hard to come to terms with. As you can imagine, that was the very last time I ever saw Ted, and I warned him that if he ever came near me again, I would definitely call the police. I remember he mocked me and laughed. "But I am the police. Do you think anyone in the force is going to believe a word from a silly little girl like you over a highly esteemed police officer like myself?" It was only because Ted was in the force that I didn't actually report what he'd done to me, because I very much doubted I would be taken seriously. I knew his cantankerous temper was dangerous and very much out of control, because when he became incandescent with rage, he could potentially commit murder. He was a very frightening person indeed. As you can imagine, living in Charleston meant that I had not spoken to Hayley for a long time, and imagine my surprise when she called a year later, just out of the blue, and announced off the cuff that she was actually getting married. She wanted me to be her maid of honour for her special day. I was over the moon and exceedingly excited. The wedding was going to be held at her parents' apple farm, and there would be a large marquee and 200 guests. I was told that she'd met the man of her dreams, and she couldn't wait for me to meet him. "He's gorgeous," she told me, "tall, dark and handsome." I was thrilled for Hayley and eager to meet her dapper fiancé. It would be good to get back home, visit my parents, and pop over to her house for the rehearsal and, of course, pre-wedding party before the wedding day. Fast forward to the night of the rehearsal, where there was going to be a before-wedding party for the immediate family and some close special friends. It was lovely to return home, and I was delighted to see my beloved parents, whom were both in jovial spirits and grilling me intensely on the finer details of university life, and whether I had managed to meet a nice boy yet. "A few losers," I said, "but nothing worthy of commentary." "You have terrible taste in men, dear," my mother chided. "You want someone like your dad, dear, reliable and solid." "You're right," I confessed, "but men like Dad don't grow on trees, Mother." Before long, I was walking down the gravel pathway to Hayley's house, and I could hear loud, animated voices, clinking of glasses, laughter, and lots of chatter. For a moment I felt rather awkward, like a fish out of water, as I had not seen Hayley for so long. I walked rather anxiously through the entrance hall that was already cluttered with wedding gifts wrapped in fancy ribbons and bows. As I walked through the house, I could see there were tables decked out with sumptuous-looking food, and people helping themselves to delectable snacks and talking intently together. Suddenly, Hayley burst through the sliding doors and rushed eagerly towards me, throwing herself into my arms as we embraced. It was so good to see my very best friend, and tears welled up in my eyes. "It's been too long," she said, wiping tears from her face. "Come, I've someone I want you to meet. Come and meet my dark teddy bear." Before I knew it, she was dragging me by the hands towards her fiancé, and when I saw him, I nearly fainted on the spot. It was no other than Ted Barber himself, the very man that had nearly strangled me to death. In that moment, the graphic memories of what he'd done to me that fateful evening came flooding back. I do not know who looked more shocked, Ted or myself. We just stared at each other in utter horror. I remember thinking, "Oh my God, this just cannot be happening." "This is my teddy bear," gushed Hayley. "Is he not so handsome, Amber?" "Ted and I have met before," I said coldly. "Yes, that's right," Ted interjected. "I'm afraid Amber and I do have a bit of a history. We did date a few times, but I broke it off when I realised that she was falling very hard for me.
I knew that there was no future for us because the attraction was not mutual.
Talk about arrogance. I couldn't believe how impertinent Ted was. He looked so smug and conceited as he regarded me with a very jubilant, self-satisfied, smug kind of look on his face. "Oh dear," said Haley, looking concerned. "I hope I've not made things awkward for you, Amber." "Not at all," I said. As the party continued, I watched Haley and Ted together. On the surface, they seemed like your quintessential, happy, very much in love couple. But I knew about Ted's insidious, malevolent, dark side, and I simply had to warn Haley about him. So at the very best opportunity, I asked if I could speak to her alone. But by the looks of things, Ted had already filled Haley's head with an abundance of fictitious claims about our past relationship, and had spun so many lies to her about me. "I need to talk to you about Ted. He's not who you think he is." "What do you mean?" said Haley. "Well, I know this is going to be hard to believe, Haley, and there's no nice way about saying this, but he did try to kill me once. He got so angry and incensed with me, and then began to throttle and strangle me. That's the truth about how our relationship actually ended." "Stop lying, Amber. I know what all this is about. It's the green-eyed monster, isn't it? You can't bear it that I'm marrying the man you want. You're so jealous that you're actually smearing Ted's character and reputation with these ridiculous allegations. Now that's nasty of you." "I know Ted. He'd never harm a fly, nor raise a hand to a woman." "You have changed, Amber, since you went to university. You've become spiteful and mean. I don't like the new you." "It's the truth, Amber," I insisted. "This is the last thing that I wanted to tell you before your wedding. But I don't want you to marry him, knowing what I know about him. And I needed to warn you because Ted has a very violent, dangerous temper. And your life could be in danger. That's why I have to tell you. There's no other reason." "Now that's low, talking about Ted like that. Get out. I don't want you at my wedding. No one who talks about my fiancé like this has any part in my life. I never want to see you again, Amber. Get out." "I'm so sorry, Haley. I wanted you to know the truth. I needed to warn you." "Out," she screamed. "And if I ever see you again, it'll be far too soon. As far as I'm concerned, our friendship is well and truly over." I remember walking away from that party, tears pouring down my cheeks in long streams. I felt so wretched and terrible, like an atrocious, depraved human being that had ruined Haley's life. I drove back to Charleston the very next morning with a huge lump in the back of my throat. I knew I'd done the right thing, warning Haley off Ted, but why did it feel so wrong? Why did I feel this dreadful guilt, self-reproach, and why was I so rueful? I knew that I'd lost my very best friend over the most deplorable man that I'd ever met. I really felt this terrible, anguished hollow inside me, like an emptiness that could never be filled, because Haley was like a sister to me, and now that friendship had withered and died overnight, like a beautiful flower that simply could never be revived. Several months went by, and I returned home to our apple farm in West Virginia for a weekend's break, and of course to see my parents. Imagine my amazement when my mother informed me that Haley had been around several times asking after me, and eager to know when I'd be getting back. "I thought she was living in Charleston with her new husband," I said. "What's she doing at her parents' place?" "Oh, it's a very sad story. Dreadful turn of events. Poor thing. I gather she's getting divorced," my mother told me. "She's left that Ted fellow. She's even filed a restraining order against him. Can you believe it?" "What?" I asked in astonishment. "Do you know why?" "Oh, she reckons the man tried to kill her in a fit of rage, but she kicked him in the groin and managed to escape. The poor girl. What she's been through. And he seemed like such a nice fellow. It's the quiet ones you really have to watch, you know. He's a police officer and has been suspended from the force pending an investigation. It's just too terrible. You can't believe that this sort of thing happened next door to us." In a trice, Haley was at my front door, and I was mortified by her startling appearance. She had lost so much weight that her clothes were hanging limply off her body, and her pale face was gaunt, haggard and drawn.
Even her blue eyes were framed by telltale dark rims. "What happened to you?" I said, cradling her into my arms like a baby. "You look as if you've been through a meat grinder." "Let's go for a walk in the grove," said Haley, "like the old times. I've so much I need to tell you." I was so excited to take a walk in the Sylvan with Haley, as it had been so long since we'd had a walk there together. "Do you remember Meadow?" I said. "She was such a tame deer. She would follow us everywhere we went. And then she got old. I think deers only live to be about 6 years old, but she hung around us for a good 8 years or so. She lived quite a good life." "I think she must have died," reflected Haley. "It was so odd. She was so incredibly tame, don't you think? I mean, she was more like a dog than a deer." "Do you remember the pink collar you bought for Meadow?" she asked. "Oh, I do," I laughed. "I spent all my pocket money on it, and it was leather and top of the range, and cost me a fortune." "You were right," said Haley suddenly. "I should have listened to you. About Ted, I mean. He was a monster. He wasn't right in the head. I did try to warn you, but he was a prince that was really a toad, not the other way round." "I didn't listen," said Haley. "I never knew that Ted would be a complete Jekyll and Hyde." I was to discover from Haley's revelations that she had succumbed to a barrage of abuse from Ted. He had succeeded in breaking Haley's wrist, leg and collarbone, and had thrown her around their apartment like a rag doll. He'd beaten her up, and finally, in a fit of indignant anger, had tried to strangle her to death, just like he did to me. But she was able to break free when she hit him so hard in the groin that, wincing in pain, he retracted his tight hold from her neck, and he doubled over in agony. When she realised how close she'd come to losing her life, she courageously reported everything to the police, many who were Ted's fellow officers. Haley succeeded in filing a restraining order against Ted. It turned out that a few women in the force had also reported Ted behaving inappropriately towards them at work, and also having moments of incandescent rage. "I love it here in the grove," said Haley. "It brings back so many beautiful memories of our childhood." The Sylvan was indeed bewitching, and even more so than I'd remembered, for the oak trees, dogwoods, pines and sycamores had grown taller and fuller, and the forest floor was covered in ferns and rambling pretty foliages, and some of the paths seemed cleared, possibly by my own father. After a while the captivating bird song all but faded, and we were met with the sound of the water cascading and crashing against the rocks. Suddenly we got the shock of our lives when a white-tailed deer came bolting towards us like a happy, bounding dog that is eager to greet you and is not reticent in any way. The deer had no trepidation or fear of us, and was treating us much like Meadow had done when she was alive. It was idiosyncratic and anomalous, especially since this deer was wearing Meadow's old pink collar. But it wasn't Meadow. How on earth had that happened? Who had put Meadow's collar on this strange, congenial deer that seemed to think that she was a dog? If that was not peculiar and incongruous enough for you, the deer was actually following us around like Meadow had done, which was nothing short of extraordinary, because any hunter will tell you that deers don't behave like this. If they did, they would be easy pickings for anyone who fancied a bit of venison. I could not make any sense of it all. I was completely nonplussed and befuddled. That was when we heard a whistling sound, like a call a man makes when he calls his dogs. All of a sudden the docile deer went scampering up to this huge, hairy humanoid, the likes of such I've never seen before. I knew at once that this deer was this creature's pet, whatever on earth he was. The strange, hairy humanoid seemed as bewildered and stunned to behold us as we were indeed to behold him, possibly because no one had been exploring the Sylvan for a very long time. He wasn't expecting such a random off-the-cunt encounter. For a while we stood there gawking at each other, and Haley and I should have been absolutely terrified, but the little deer that was rubbing his head affectionately against the hairy creature made me see clearly that despite his formidable, intimidating appearance, this creature must have had a good heart. I also realised in that moment that maybe the beloved Meadow had also been his pet too, which would explain why she was so fearless in our company. I imagined she had been domesticated by this strange humanoid. I wish I could do justice to you in explaining exactly how this strange creature looked, because he was very human in many aspects of his biology, most especially his long oval face, but I also discerned that he had an emotional intelligence and discernment. He also knew about compassion and love, because the bond he had with that deer was indisputable. The creature was absolutely titanic in size and built for strength, speed and power. His sinewy body was rippled with muscle, and the size of his shoulders and upper torso was something to behold. It was quite frankly colossal. I would say at a guess he was 7 foot tall, 600 pounds and 3 foot wide, and covered in long flowing dark hair, which had an auburn tint. The creature had powerful strong legs, overlong arms and a dome-shaped head that merged seamlessly into the shoulders in a natural flow. I didn't detect any neck to speak of. The leathery grey oval face was rarely what got my attention because of how human it appeared to be. It possessed a very wrinkled, furrowed brow ridge, flat nose, very slender lips, and he had deep-set, russet gold eyes. I was in total awe of this creature and was so grateful that the deer was present, because I would have possibly run away screaming at the top of my lungs if it had not been the case. I was almost certain that the creature could have killed us both, yet looking at him I knew he was a reasoning being and could sense that he wasn't a hardened killer, and I know he recognised the humanity in us that he was aware existed within himself. And why would you attack something that held a resemblance to yourself? That would be crazy. As bizarre and as incredulous as this sounds, I felt as if the creature recognised and knew us. I reflected on my childhood memories and the times we'd felt as if something had been watching us. Was it him, I wondered? Had he been watching Haley and I over the years, playing around in the woods together? I reflected on the nest that we had found all those years ago, and the large tracks in the mud. It was all beginning to make sense now. The little deer was nuzzling the critter, and with such affection and love, and I watched his big hands and sausage-sized fingers stroke the deer very tenderly. For a moment no one said anything, until the creature turned around and whistled to the deer, who followed him back into the woods obediently. We watched him move away, and as he did so he turned around once and nodded to us as if he was saying goodbye. In that moment my heart literally lifted and warmed to the creature, but what he was I could not imagine. Looking back, what we saw that day, I am certain Haley and I encountered a Bigfoot. I sense he lived in those woods for many years and was well acquainted and familiar with the both of us. I think that although I'm sure he must eat venison, which is deer, I think he keeps a deer as a pet, which makes sense to me. Maybe he rescued it when it was a fawn or something. After all, if they have human-like characteristics, why would they not keep a pet like any of us would? On the subject of Ted, I'm glad to tell you he was turfed out of the police force and went on several anger management courses, but what he's doing now, I can't imagine, and I don't care. I'm glad to say that Haley and I are still very best friends, with children and husbands of our own. And finally we struck pay dirt, because we found ourselves very good men. So there you are. That's my story. Oh, I loved that story. That story was absolutely incredible. Amazing. And I just love Little Meadow. Who wouldn't want a little fawn that behaves like a dog? Until next time, goodbye and good night.